The topic is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and we're talking to Dr. Lewis V. Baldwin from Vanderbilt University. Dr. Baldwin, before we end this show for today, let's give you an opportunity to bring in some additional information dealing with the Civil Rights Act, and then later to sort of point us in some direction as to where we might be able to go from here. Let's use the entire period to do that.
Okay, before the commercial break, we were talking about the fact that the provisions of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 have not really been actualized or realized or translated into public policy solutions. I think in 1965 we needed the Voting Rights Act because part of the provisions of the Civil Rights Act had not been fulfilled. If you look at the Civil Rights Act of 1964, you'll notice that one aspect of it dealt with voting. But there were no specific guidelines about how people should register, about how the government should monitor voting activity and that kind of thing. So we needed the Civil Rights Act of 1965. Had to be added as another piece of civil rights legislation. When Dr. King was killed, before he was killed in 1968, he made a comment about all of these pieces of legislation, and he put the responsibility for the failure of these pieces of legislation on the federal government, because he felt that it's one thing to adopt, to introduce, to pass civil rights legislation. It's quite another to provide the resources for the implementation of these pieces of civil rights legislation. So we're dealing with that problem of legacy, as Dr. King raised it, with respect to civil rights legislation.
And so the resources are not there, even now, in terms of now. How would you bring this whole question that we have dealing with affirmative action and quotas and et cetera? Is that really considered to be part of the civil rights legacy of movement? I mean, how would you put that in?
I would say the Civil Rights Act of 1964 certainly contributed to this. You speak of affirmative action, you speak of quotas, you speak of reparations, what Dr. King once called compensatory measures. I think you have to see it in relationship to what happened in 1964 with the Civil Rights Bill. But the fact that these particular issues are still being raised in 2004, 40 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, tells us something. And that is that for some reason we have not been able to resolve the problems surrounding civil rights, surrounding economic justice, surrounding equal opportunity and social justice in our society. Somehow or another, we are still wrestling with the same problem.
Now, would you suggest that when we think in terms of economic justice, that it took us almost 40 years to deal with what might be considered the most important elements, and that's public accommodation and voting rights and et cetera. And now we've only had an opportunity now to get around to dealing with Title VI and some of the other aspects of it, and that it might be time to deal with those particular aspects of it.
Well, what we have come to see over the last 40 years is that even though the Civil Rights Act of 1964 guaranteed job opportunities, equal employment opportunities, education, that if you don't have the financial resources, it doesn't mean much. You can have equal opportunity, but equal access to restaurants, hotel, educational institutions, but if you don't have the money or the resources to find your place in these institutions, then it becomes problematic. And the 64 Civil Rights Act did not address that. The problem of economic inequality and the lack of economic empowerment, not only in black communities, but in other minority communities and among women as well.
And so